Shall we move into our review, Jennifer?
Sure.
Our review this week is oh geez, I have to actually look up and see what year. I think it was a 2019 release, if I'm correct here. Let's check it. No, 2020
Well,
release.
okay, if just a moment, but I think it's a 2020 release with
Yeah.
a 2019 Kickstarter, but I could be wrong. You know what
Now,
I mean?
BGG says 2020. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. But people were playing it. I remember hearing about it, a couple of years ago in playtesting and stuff. So, 2020 release, 18 Chesapeake. Plays 2 to 6 players with a playing time of about 180 minutes, which is actually maybe an hour short. It's more like I think it's a 4-hour game, but it's not an 8-hour game, which
Players,
other
you're probably
18xx's are.
looking at, I would say it's more like 45 minutes to an hour a player.
That's fair. That's totally fair. It has a BGG weight of 3.85, which sure. I mean, it depends. If you're very familiar with 18xx, then it has a weight of 0 for you because it's very simple. Designed by Scott Peterson, who is the owner and founder of All Aboard Games, which is also the publisher. And Scott has done a wonderful job of bringing 18xx's to the masses lately through his successful Kickstarters. He recently did a Kickstarter of 1822 as well. Let's talk about 18 Chesapeake. Jennifer, can you tell us a little bit about this game?
Okay, so for the 18xxers out there, this is basically simplified 1830. Okay, now for the rest of everybody, right? This is a train game, a train and stock game, of course. You buy stocks. No, I'm sorry. Let me start over. Companies are created, and then stocks are bought. You know, from those companies, from the bank, which is called the IPO when you're buying the stocks. And then there's what's called an operating round, and you try to make money with your trains during the operating round. The main obvious challenge to the game is that as the game goes on, the trains that you have uh, become what is called rusted, i.e., they cannot be used anymore. And since the company itself does not have any income per se. I mean, you can make runs and then put the money back into the company, but it's not like many games where oh yes, at the end of a turn you get $50 or whatever. That's not how it works. And like I said, the challenge is mostly trying to manage your trains so that you don't go bankrupt. And in this game, it does have well, I don't know if you call it player elimination, but if someone goes bankrupt, the game is over.
Right.
Okay?
And that person definitely loses, and everybody else sees who has the most money, and the game's ends, and see who wins from who has the most money.
Yeah, yeah. And so it is, the whole genre is popular because it's very interaction based. So if I see that Ben is making a ton of money through, let's say, Washington D.C., and during the operations phase, I can block that route. And that's one of the things about it is some people, might call it take that, but it's not take that. It's not arbitrary. As a famous 18xxer has said, I believe, you win the game because everybody else loses.
Sure.
And you have to play that way if you want to play well. I am no expert at 18xx, but I love it. I love watching um, the board develop. I love the choices people make. No, there are no random factors except one, which is very early on in the game and really doesn't have a huge impact on who wins. It has an impact on the game, but it doesn't have any impact on who wins. And so, you're going to start companies, buy stock in those companies. You hope that the companies return dividends, and you win by having the most money, including the stock valuation. Now, it's not a game like, some games, yeah, you win by the most money, but the money is really victory points. And so every time you spend the money, you're spending victory points. That's not what's going on here. You must spend money in order to win the game. So,
Yeah.
it's definitely a currency based type of game experience.
So now I think we have a cool opportunity here because you are quite experienced with 18xx. You told me you've probably played 200 games of 18xx.
Of
Um,
1830, yeah.
yeah. And right, of 1830 alone. And I have probably played less than 20 games of 18xx in my whole life, probably somewhere between 15 and 20. I've played 1830, I've played 1862, I've played 18 Chesapeake now, and I've played 1879. I think I played 18 Ireland at some point. No, not 18. I played I forget the one that Tom has. But yeah, I've played a bunch, but I'm still very new at it. I would love, I think, why don't I give my thoughts on 18 Chesapeake as somebody who's only played, less than 20 games, and you give your thoughts on 18 Chesapeake as someone who has played hundreds of games of 18xx. So what is the experienced 18xxers take on 18 Chesapeake?
Well, the question, okay, so as in nearly every heavy game, you cannot make true assessments until you've played several games with experienced players. And, Matt's really nice, but he's not an experienced player, you can tell.
Nope, I am
So,
not.
but he's great to play with. It's awesome. So I can't really give you a full, rundown on that. I will say this much: 18 Chesapeake has a lot of double town tiles, and for each tile, there's only one. And my suspicion is a lot of the gameplay is going to revolve around those tiles, but I don't know because I haven't been able to play with people who are familiar enough with the game to be able to evaluate the importance. That's one of the, when you're looking at an 18xx, or at least when I'm looking at one, I'm looking at, okay, so what here is unchangeable? What here is a one time thing? What, you know what I mean? And then those are the
What,
things.
what, explain to me that, because what do you mean by one time thing?
Well, okay, so, in 1830, New York is very valuable, and you're trying to get into New York, right? And 18 Chesapeake, New York is very valuable, but it's surrounded by these two town tracks. The tracks are hexes, and the board, of course, is hexes. And so once those two town tracks are placed, they can never be upgraded, they can never be changed, nothing.
Right, right.
And
So
so, I'm
that
looking at
changes the
that
whole game, right?
part, yeah. And so, because people want to get to New York, and also in 18 Chesapeake, a lot of the companies start, not a lot, but what, three, I think, companies start relatively close to New York. How that plays out is probably going to have an impact on the game.
Right.
Okay. And if experienced players are playing it and know what the good ones are and what the bad ones are, I mean, I could easily see a mini game happening just in that area where someone just gets a company just to screw up the tiles going into New York, right?
Right. Right.
So, um, you know, it could happen. So I don't know. I can't give a full assessment until I have played enough games with people who are experienced. And the only reason I'm giving Matt a hard time is because, as he does what many players do, is he just considers what's in front of him instead of looking down the line. And
Yeah.
in 18XX, it's very important to figure out how you're going to get to permanent trains, how you're going to get to a diesel if your company needs a diesel, What is your stock holding going to look like? How do I get to a full set of certificates? All of these things which aren't obvious, but as you continue to play, you're going to have a better understanding of.
How do you think this game compares to other 18xx's, and what does it do things you love in 18xx? Does it do things you don't like in 18xx? Where does this fall into the whole genre for you?
I happen to like 22 best, and even after playing this a lot of times, I still like 22 best. But 22 has more going on. As you mentioned yourself, this is a fairly simple 18xx. I mean, it's still 18xx, which is very important.
Yeah.
So, to me, there have been some other games like Poseidon and some other stuff that are supposed to be entry to 18xx, and they, in my opinion, fail at that. But this is entry to 18xx. I'm just not sure how much replayability it has because of the simplicity.
Right.
I mean, I'm not
Right.
saying don't buy it, because when I say not as much replayability, I'm talking about plays at the 50 plus level.
Right. Of course. Well, talk to me about the privates in this game, and also if you could maybe explain to people what privates are.
Okay. So back in the day, because they do have a real historical equivalent, when the trains were first starting in the U.S., I can't speak to the U.K., but just to the U.S., there were a bunch of small companies who were running trains, and they were running short routes. And then I would suspect that as people began to understand that moving cargo and moving people by train was going to be a big thing, then let's combine those private companies and create larger corporations. Trains in the US were the first um, companies that were incorporated, i.e., they sold stock. Okay. Um, so the privates are just a way to kind of get started in the game. I'm not sure that with the exception of two, that the other privates really mean much. I mean, people just use them as piggy banks. And I think had I designed the game, I probably wouldn't have bothered with them, but that's, Scott's choice. Um, the Vanderbilt, though, and I really like the mechanic that a president share comes with the Vanderbilt, and that president share is random. That was great. That's exactly how
Right.
it should be.
That
That's
changes up every game pretty drastically.
yeah, yeah. Depending on which one it is, definitely.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me talk a little bit about what I think of Chesapeake as a new 18xx player. And I will say I hadn't played an 18xx in a year. I haven't played many board games in a year. But it had been a while since I'd played 18xx, and it wasn't like riding a bike where I just immediately remembered the pacing and the timing, and the pacing and timing of an 18xx are kind of everything. And if you've sort of forgotten the train rush and the overall pacing of when you need to figure out how to get your permanent trains and all those things, you will lose badly. And I did in my first game, and I think in my second game it clicked back in and I was playing again. But Jennifer and both Ben M were both very helpful in giving me advice as I went through, because I wanted to really try to grok the strategy as much as I could so that I could speak somewhat knowledgeably during this review. So to me, this is the first 18xx I've played, other than 30, where I feel like I'm getting all the things that make 18xx. I feel like this is everything. Like if you've played 18 Chesapeake, you'll have pretty much seen all the most important elements of 18xx. You'll have seen privates, you'll have seen stock manipulation, you'll have seen the importance of running good companies, you'll see the importance of not running good companies, you'll see the importance of tokening, of track building, of strategic track building, of denying tiles. I think it has all of the basic strategies and things that make 18xx fun, all the shenanigans, as they call them. but with the edges rounded off a little bit on all of it as well, and the sort of the sharp edges sanded down a bit. Can you be totally hosed in this game? Yes. Is it harder than in 1830? Yes. You can't be as hosed so easily. So it's a little more of a forgiving experience, but if you play badly like I did, you will die to the train rush. And I'll explain what a train rush is very briefly. As Jennifer said, there are certain trains that rust, which is an abstraction of the idea of technology moving forward and older trains becoming obsolete. So if your company has super old trains, when the latest train is invented and the abstraction breaks down here, your trains just disappear, poof, they're gone. And if your company has no trains, one of the rules in almost all 18xx's is if your company can run, it must run. And if you can't buy a train, you must buy a train. And if you cannot afford a train, you dip into your private money. And if you don't have enough money in your private money and in liquidating your stocks, you are dead. So if you don't keep the train rush in mind, and when somebody quickly buys through the trains, thus abstracting the idea of technology moving forward, if you have not prepared for that, you can be very badly damaged. And that's sort of the fun part of 18xx, is sort of figuring out how you're going to survive the train rush and how you're going to get what we call permanent trains, which are trains that never rust. Once your company has a permanent train, a couple things happen. It becomes a company that no one has to fear is going to be dumped on them. Company dump is a thing that happens in 18xx and can also happen in 18 Chesapeake. That's when you purposefully fail a company in order to make what I just described happening in the train rush happen to somebody else. And you sell all your stocks, and now they have more stock than you, and they become the president, and it's their problem to deal with. But once you have a permanent train, people can start buying stock in you because you're never going to dump a good company on them. Now it's a company that will never have that happen to it. So navigating that switch from non-permanent trains to permanent trains, to me is as a beginner player, that's the game. Figuring out how can I survive that. Just like in Age of Steam, figuring out how to get into the green, how to get into making money as opposed to losing money every round. As a beginner, that's the whole game. Figure that out. Once you figure that out, okay, now we can start playing. Now you can start really figuring out how you can hurt people by tokens, dropping your station markers down, how you can hurt people by messing with the tiles. Then you really start playing the game. And I think 18 Chesapeake does a great job of walking you through the stages of learning the strategies for 18xx. And the best thing about it, you can finish it. You can actually finish this in a game night, which I can't say about any other 18xx at all. So not only is... Sorry, go ahead.
Finish 62.
Okay, that's fair. If nobody has to be taught, because the teach for 62 is a beast. But yeah.
And Matt mentioned where we played it.
Yes, and that's one of my favorite things about this. We played this on 18xx.games, which is a fantastic site. I think the gentleman who made it is his name is Toby or Tony, I forget his name, but it's a beautiful site. It does everything for you. It's web-based, not app-based. You don't have to download it. It's not like Vassal. It's even prettier than Vassal, just a little bit. But it works flawlessly. It was like a tank. It was hard to hurt it. I mean, if you could undo things, you could move through things. It does the math for you. It shows you what tiles are available. So that really makes an 18xx playable because there's no setup, there's no teardown. And as we all know, the longest thing in 18xx is manipulating your chips and chipping up and chipping down and give me the chips and here's your chips. And that's an hour of the game just right there. And it definitely cuts all that out for you. And it does all the calculating for you. You still need a calculator so you can figure out how not to die. But other than that, I think it was fantastic. So I really enjoyed this. To me, this 1846 was another 18xx I've played a bunch that I didn't mention. I don't like 1846, if I have to be honest. I think it's okay. It's not that I don't like it. It's that I don't think it does what I like about 18xx.
Well, its biggest problem, in my opinion, and why I don't think it's a good beginner, is because there are, okay, well, let me step back just a little bit. I don't really like having to guide people step by step through a game.
Mm-hmm.
But in 46, there are just bad companies.
Yes.
So I have to say, well, no, yes, that looks like that, but no, you're going to lose if you take that company. You're almost
Right.
certainly going to lose. And
Right.
see,
Because there's, yeah,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry.
No, I was just saying there are companies that are good in the early game and in the mid game and in the late game, and you have to know that, or else you're in trouble.
Well, I would argue that the B&O in that game is never good, but that's a different discussion. But see, in 18 Chesapeake, you don't have that issue. I'm very comfortable with beginners choosing any of them. I mean, I might want to point out the New York, the ones that are close to New York might be a little more complex, but you can certainly win from there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And one thing also, they were all fun. I think I've played most of the companies at this point. They're all fun to figure out. Like they're all a cool little puzzle unto themselves.
Yeah, definitely. They all have their own challenges. No, and the other thing about 18 Chesapeake, and just like we keep talking about the simplicity, one of the best things that it doesn't have what's known as a ton of MacGuffins. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
like for example, MacGuffins are basically places where or at least my understanding of MacGuffin is, or it varies from 1830. So, like for example, in 46, it's called a partial. It's a partial capitalization game
Right.
because you don't, get all of the capitalization. Well, in Chesapeake, because it's not that, you don't even have to worry about the capitalization concept. This is what you get, right? And then in 46, you can pay out a half dividend. Well, that's another decision for a beginner, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, and oh, also tile placement, each yellow tile placement costs money. Well, again, more managing, more trying to figure out, do I have enough money? And see, when you're trying to teach a game, you want you want a clear cut, good game without a ton of decisions because for every decision, you're almost certainly at some point going to get a beginner saying, what should I do?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what I think all of us want is for a beginner to kind of, yeah, okay, I get it. Maybe I'm not going to win, but I can see my way forward.
And you did that really well for me in this game. There were times when I would ask a question and you would go, I think you should think about it for a second and answer it for yourself. And you were
Yeah,
right to do that. There was times when you were like, no, this is, strategically, this is probably the better move here. But you were like, look at it for a second longer, and I think you'll figure it out. And you're like, or you won't, and that'll also be a lesson.
right.
So you can take the training wheels off a lot faster in 18
Right.
Chesapeake
And the
than in other
other thing is, folks, so I would not let him go bankrupt. Okay. So it's not like,
ones.
I'll just push you over the edge. But there
Yeah.
are, no matter what, in 30 and 18 Chesapeake, there are a number of decisions that really impact the game. And see, I love that about that, is that you make decisions that matter, you
Yeah.
know? And
Yeah.
too many games, in my opinion, have these little micro decisions. It's kind of like, you can walk firmly with a full walk, or you can put your foot one step in front of the other and hope you eventually get there. And I don't care for those kind of games much. So that's one of the reasons why 18XX appeals to me, is that I feel like the decisions in my game in the game have an impact on both a short term and a long term impact on how the game plays out.
Yeah. I agree with that completely. Um, and as a new player, it's really fun to watch the mechanisms turn. It does a thing that I've never really experienced in another board game, which is just the blossoming of understanding of strategy. Like there's definitely very complicated games where, in the third game you kind of go, oh, now I see what the game is. But I feel like with 18xx as a genre, you as a player go through that on a much larger scale of, after 10 games, you go, oh, okay, now I see the game. And then 10 games later, you have that experience again. Oh,
Right,
no, this is the game. And then 50 games later, you probably have that experience again. No, this is the game. And so there's
right.
just this much larger sense of exploration and understanding and personal growth as a player that I think is really satisfying, and probably why it's such a popular genre with people.
Right, right. And it's kind of in some ways it's the anti-hero because it's long. You're not gonna, you know, finish a game in the time it would take you to play Wingspan.
Yep.
You need multiple plays, and so many of us, including me, flip from game to game, and 18xx is not a good genre to do that with.
Yep.
And but it's interesting to see all the interest now. To see it's kind of like as you guys know, I'm the or actually you folks know, I'm the pioneer. And so what happens is I see my own growth in gaming in the hobby, right? So first
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of, oh, Settlers is cool. Oh, Demarker is cool. Oh, 1830 is cool, right? And you kind of see that in the entire hobby as it moves into fillers and medium games, and then it moves into the medium heavy games. And now we're up at the 18xx games because we've grown as a hobby, and that is beautiful.
I agree, and it has been awesome to watch 18xx become cool. And it's I feel like it's totally cool to like 18xx right now. It's almost like it's like artisanal, I don't know, like denim or something. It's just like it's become like a super hipster thing, for better or for worse. But I think for better, as more people are playing the genre, and I think it's a pretty welcoming community I found so far.
Yeah,
And they just want more players, and they're usually pretty nice and friendly because they know that their genre is pretty niche, and they just want to play more for the most
right,
part. Most 18xxers I've met.
right.
Um, so and they're usually very happy to teach, and and so to me, I will give you my final thoughts on this as a newbie, and then I would love your final thoughts on this, Jennifer, as an experienced 18xxer. My newbie final thoughts would be, if you're like me and you are interested in 18xx, this is the only 18xx that I would start with. For this reason, I played 1846 as my first 18xx. I played it 3 or 4 times, and then even by my fourth play, I was still going, I'm not totally sure I'm getting why people love 18xx. I was enjoying it, I was having fun, but I wasn't obsessed. It wasn't until my first game of 1830 that I kind of went, oh, I get why people love 18xx, and that may have been helped by having played 3 or 4 games of 1846. So I got the basics down before I played 1830. But that was the game where I was like, oh no, this is really cool. I think you'll get that experience pretty quickly with 18 Chesapeake. I think it shows you everything that 18xx can do in its most basic forms. You've got privates, you've got stock manipulation, you've got all the fun stuff. It can be mean, but it's not brutal. And it's not that long comparatively. Obviously, it's a 3 to 4 hour game, but on 18xx.games, it's even shorter. Either way, it's a game where what's important when you're learning 18xx is to finish games, to see the whole stages, to see the setup, to see the stock rounds, to see the train rush, and then to see how a game ends. What it looks like when everybody's just running their routes and they're running out the bank. And to really get that whole picture multiple times in. And if you're doing it with 1830, you're lucky to get a couple games in a year. If you're a gamer with who doesn't game, you need a whole day to play 1830. And how often does that happen for the average person? So to me, this is there's no question that this is the go-to beginner 18xx. And what I like about it is that, at least from what I've understood, experienced gamers will not feel like they're playing a boring 18xx while you learn to play. that it still has something that appeals to them. And so, it may not be their favorite 18xx, it may not be 1822, but I don't think an 18xx player is going to be like, oh, fine, let's suffer through a few games of this so we can go play the real games. I think they'll go, oh no, this is a real game. I'm excited to play this. I'm gonna whoop you real bad at it, but I'm still getting enjoyment out of it. And so, yeah, that's where I stand on it. I think this is the one must-have beginner 18xx. Jennifer, can you give us your final experienced thoughts on it?
Well, from an experience point of view, 18 Chesapeake would be considered to be an operational game, which means that basically, it has some aspects of a stock focused games, because when you sell for each stock that you sell, the price goes down. Like in 62, that's not true. If it doesn't matter if you sell 3 or if you sell 1, it's the price drop is the same. But in Chesapeake, it's like 30, and the stock goes down. So there can be, people trashing your stock just because they can. And of course, guys, folks, I play a gentle version with new players. I don't do that kind of thing, right? But at some point, Matt, the gloves may come off. But so for experienced 18xxers, they could skip this. I mean, truly, most really experienced 18xxers want a stock game. They want 1817, for example. It's a Sicilian one, but I can't remember the name. That one I believe is very stock focused. I'm not into the stock ones because it's too much math. And
Sure.
Trying to figure, like in 17, you can short stocks, right? So that's a lot of math. Trying to figure out, okay, if I short this and then this happens, it's just, for me, it's too much. But 17 is very popular in the 18xx subgenre. So, yeah, to be very honest with you, I don't know that has much appeal to the experienced 18xxer, but I agree with you that they would be happy to play it, especially if they felt that the players might later play 17 or play 30. 30 is another game. I don't know if the experts call it a stock game, but stock is more important, I think, in that game. So, that's kind of my take on it. For myself, I like simplicity, so I'm totally happy to play it. But as I think I said to begin with, I am not an 18xx expert.
Well, compared to me and most people probably listening, you are. So I definitely appreciate the expertise you gave me while we were playing. I feel like it gave me a greater appreciation of the genre and made me a better player too.
Oh, good. And then in a couple of plays, you'll be beating me into the floor. I'm
can't
okay
wait.
with that. I'm okay.
If you know me, that's the only reason I play is to destroy people. So I cannot wait for that.
But you can't be a real 18xx player unless you want. Like I said, the reason you win is because everybody else loses.
Yeah, exactly. One last thing before we go, I will say that one fun thing about 18xx for me at least is sort of building track and knowing the location. So I've played. Right. I've played 18xx games that take place in other countries, and it's a little more abstract, but there's something fun about being an American and, building a track from Ohio to New York and DC. Like it's a little more, it's less abstract and a little more intuitive and thematic for me playing this map. So your experience with American geography might add to the enjoyment of it as well.
And, they're 1862 is British for you UK people.
That's right. That's one where it's like I've spent some time there, but it's a little more abstract to me because I don't know a lot of the locations and stuff. So it's a small thing, but something to think about that it may impact your enjoyment of it. Hey, if you enjoyed that video, you very well might enjoy the other videos you now see being suggested to you on screen. Also, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could like, share, or subscribe to our Game Brain channel. Thanks so much.